No, 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 it's not a prop. I don't do props. I only use the power of my voice. Okay. So yesterday you talked about objects, or as I like to call them, object literals. Today we're going to talk about object methods. Specifically, we're going to talk about what a method is. We're going to talk about how you create, access, and run methods. And we're going to give a very, very small introduction to a keyword called this that's going to factor heavily into the rest of your JavaScript education. Before we get into that, we're going to talk simply about what a method is. So a method is an action that you can perform on a value. You have used methods in this course before. Perhaps, out of curiosity, just to know where I'm starting, how many of you guys have heard the term method before? A good part of you, or a good amount of you. Yeah, those who haven't, you've been using them. Anything you see that is dotted off an array or off an object is commonly termed a method. So index of is a method on the global array object. Have you guys talked at all about global objects or objects that are native to JavaScript? Someone say yes or no. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, so basically every function that you've been calling to like get the length of an array or a string or to turn a string uppercase, these they are functions, but specifically they're methods because they're associated with an object. In this case, the object that they're associated with is any of the global objects like capital S string, capital A array that are native to JavaScript. So this is just a quick example. I'm not going to bother asking you what it console logs because I think that you guys are all fairly familiar with the index of method. But just to like really drive this point home, we have an array, and because this array is an example, it is part of. I don't want to get too deep into prototypes yet because that's another rabbit hole. So we'll just say that because countries is an array, and arrays have certain methods in JavaScript, we can call one of these methods index of to return the index that our parameter is in array, or in the country's array. Anyone have any questions so far? I also wait a super long time because sometimes people don't realize they have questions, but we're pretty early on, so I will just go forward. So, because we're programmers, we can create methods too. For example, let's take this object right here. It is an object that is the value of a variable we declare on line 5 called Grace Hopper. It has 3 properties: first, last, and rank. Does anyone remember what like the term for this first colon Grace is? Yeah, it's a key value pair. First, last, and rank are the keys. Grace, Hopper, and Rear Admiral, or to be more specific, those strings are the values. That's going to be a question.
Yeah, just about key value pairs. So I was using like the Mozilla documentation, and they generally use the term property.
Yeah.
Property is the key value pair, right? And then the property name would be the key, and property value would be the value.
Yeah, I mean, if someone talks about a property on an object, I have just colloquial, like in my day-to-day life, when someone talks about like the first property on the Grace Hopper object, they're using that as shorthand to refer to the whole key value pair. And then if they need to specifically talk about the key or the value, they will use those terms. Yep. So yeah, objects can hold any type of values, including functions. In a couple lectures, you're going to see all the really cool stuff you can do with functions. It's a lecture called Higher Order Functions. But what's important to us right now is that functions, even though they have like a specific kind of functionality, for lack of a better term, we can invoke them, they give us stuff, they do stuff, they're still just values, just like strings, just like object literals, just like arrays, and we can do pretty much anything with functions that we can do with any other value. And that includes associating them with a key on an object literal. So here we have the same object, but we've modified it to give it a method. A method, if you're looking for just a bare bones like functional definition of what a method is, it is a function that is associated with a specific object. So here we have a property. Oh, sorry, was that a hand up?
No.
Sorry, I see phantom hands sometimes. Here we have a property, my method, where the key is my method. And then the value is a function. And we see here on line 11 that we are invoking that method the same way we would evoke a function. So when we run this code, what is going to be printed to the screen? What's going to show up in that upper right-hand corner? What? The function? What the function console logs, right? Yeah. I mean, it's no. There are going to be instances. I can't remember like the order of the slides, but there are going to be instances where you log something and it's not this. It is just the function, because functions are objects, right? That's part of the whole functions are first class things, is that they're like functions and arrays are both objects. But yeah, in this case, because we're invoking it, we see the behavior that is written inside the function, which is the console log of the string I am from a method. So generally speaking, when we create methods, they should perform an action that's relevant to the idea or concept that's represented by the object itself. This is just like a best practices thing, but it's worth saying because we don't just want you to write code that works. We want you to write good code and sensible code that will make people enjoy working with you. So if we were going to write a method on Grace Hopper that has the title say quote, presumably it's going to be a quote that Grace Hopper says. Not much to explore here, but it is worth at least bringing up. Does anyone have any questions about any of this slide or any of the previous slides so far? I'm assuming it is. I didn't write these slides. But Abel, get on it. Thank you. And yeah, it just console logs the same way as the method before. So because methods operate a lot like functions, we can pass parameters into them the same way that we would pass parameters into a function, as long as when we are defining the logic inside a function, we declare a parameter. So what's this going to give me? What? Yes. Math. It's going to give us 112. And the reason it's going to give us 112 is because we're passing in 2018. Method, exactly like a function, just happens to be associated with an object. So if we gave this 2006 instead of 118, we would get 100. Yeah?
If we just had nothing in there, would it return undefined? 1718, just empty?
If we had nothing in here, you guys remember the lecture about implicit coercion? Sort of? All right. We'll take it one by one. So, do you guys remember the difference between declaring variables and defining variables? So there are two general types of ways we can declare a variable. One of them is with the keywords let, var, or const, but not var, because we live in the future. What's the other way to declare a variable in scope? I need hands and I need like a real loud projection because the air conditioner's on. What's up? Yes, absolutely, 100% correct. You can pass it as a parameter to the function. This, because we have this keyword function, which means we're defining a function, in this case an anonymous function, or forget I said that, not an anonymous function, a function that's associated with the key getAge. We are declaring a variable called year. So if we invoke this without defining the value of the variable year that we're declaring here, then we're going to be trying to, like the value of year by default is undefined. So we're going to try to return undefined minus an integer. I'm not sure what that gives. Maybe not a number. I don't know. Someone can test it out if they
That
want.
makes sense.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Great. Good question. It's amazing how much knowledge about JavaScript just comes from incidental questions that are unrelated, seemingly, to what you want to know. Great. So we gave Gracehopper a method. In this case, we gave her one called greet that takes a parameter called name and console logs a string. So it'll work, but we're kind of doing work here. We're not kind of. We are definitely doing work here that we actually don't need to do. Specifically, we're logging out the words "I am Rear Admiral Hopper," but we don't need to type Rear Admiral Hopper because we already did, right? See this? It's a small thing in this function, and this function obviously is not super arduous to type 3 words that you already typed before. But as the programs you're writing grow, you really want to take advantage of not repeating yourself for your own sanity and to follow a sort of best practices mantra called dry. Has anyone heard of dryness or dry associated with code? It stands for do not repeat yourself. And it's just people will talk about dry code because ultimately the code that we want to write, good code, is very flexible. It can do a lot of different things. It can meet a lot of different circumstances, but is self-contained. So all of this is to say we can figure out a better way to log the same thing. For example, we could do this, right? Out of curiosity, could someone give me another way to access the properties Gracehopper's rank, and Gracehopper's last name? What? This? Yeah, this is one of them. I was thinking more. I wanted to connect it back to the lecture you guys had yesterday where you talked about the difference between bracket notation and dot notation, but yeah, you're already way ahead of me. Yeah, no. We're getting there. We're getting to this. But yeah, just before we cover this, the same dot notation that allowed us to access properties outside an object works inside the object as well. Same exact logic, same functionality, and it allows us, when we invoke the greet method with the parameter Gabe, to log the message we want. Question?
So the difference in the 4 elements of the console log, it would just be the answer you're expecting is just a Gracehopper.rank. Would you also just be a Gracehopper brackets with rank in quotes?
Yes, it could be that. You could make a variable called Gracehopper's rank and set it equal to the string rank, and then do the brackets, and then do Gracehopper's rank, but that'd be wildly overkill. But, it's good to practice. It's good to know all the things we can do, use all the tools in our toolkit. Is that a question?
It is a Gracehopper code, and it is an and.
It is a what?
It is a Gracehopper code, and the undefined minus a number is n.
2 for 2.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'll take the first one.
Thanks. Now we can talk about this. We can talk about this a little bit. But because this lecture is kind of flying by, speaking of which, this lecture is kind of flying by. Does anyone have any questions, any slides we want to revisit? Yes, I don't know your names. I'm sorry. Yeah. The slide directly previous.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So in the console log, you're changing it to make it more efficient because you want to be able to use, if you wanted to use this piece of code on another, so you can make it flexible and using it instead of if you had, I guess you say hard coded, I am where I
Yeah, yeah. So this is sort of like a weird middle step between where we're ultimately getting, which is this thing, because this provides us a ton of flexibility. But even before the keyword this, what you see here on this slide is more flexible than the slide before, because
Even though it does take a long time to type that anyways.
it's less about, I mean, so you don't, the time you save isn't best exemplified by the amount of time it takes you to type it out. But what if, for example, Grace Hopper got promoted and was the thing above a rear admiral, super rear admiral? So the way we have this written out now, if we want Greek to print hi my name or hi Gabe, I am super rear admiral Hopper, all we need to do is change the string value all we need to do is change the value of rank. If we didn't have if we weren't getting that value in our method by like reaching out to access the value of Grace Hopper's rank property, we would have to write super rear admiral twice. Does that make sense?
So you're basically, when you're writing code, you kind of have to make sure that you can easily replicate things that are really important.
Yes, yes, very much so. If you guys to look forward a little bit, one of the main things taught in the full stack immersive program is a JavaScript framework called React. And one of the hallmarks of a good React application is creating things called components that are very reusable. Meaning that if you have a component that does something, and you have a gigantic app that has 500,000 lines of code, rather than writing the functionality of what you want to happen one time for each of like the 50,000 pages, you will insert that one component into each of the 50,000 pages. And then when you want that component to do something else, you only change that component, and the changes sort of are accessible to everything that uses the component. That is the same principle as what we're seeing here, where you change one thing and it affects multiple things. Yeah. Great question. Great question. Any other ones? Love to wait a long time. Okay. But now we're done. So yeah, if we want to enhance the reusability of this method even further, we can take advantage of a keyword in JavaScript, and I think it's actually in a couple other languages. I'm not super polyglot. Called this. Disclaimer. It might get a little confusing when we talk about this, because this is also a word in English that's really helpful when you're talking about any word besides this, the word in JavaScript. So the questions thing goes double. That said, we've replaced our Grace Hopper word that precedes our dot notation with the keyword this. You guys, at least some of you are familiar with this. So maybe one of these people who's familiar with this. Does someone want to wager a guess at what's going to be console logged when we run this code? Yeah. Yes, I couldn't hear you, but it sounded right. And yeah, no, it's the same thing, because in this case, the keyword this refers to the object. It's very hard to talk about this. This is a very this keyword is this really, really complex word, and we're only barely scratching the surface. But in this case, you can think about this as a keyword that represents the object in which it is written, the object in which it has been scoped. You guys remember your lecture about scope, right? No, they didn't have a lecture about scope?
I think
You did? Yeah. So we're using our wonderful keyword let, which means that our scope here is block scope. We don't need to declare a function to create a bubble of scope. We can just create scope with these two thingies, these two curly braces, not thingies. I'm a professional software engineer. But yeah, inside the scope is this object. Like, the scope declared by Grace Hopper is Grace Hopper. Does that make sense? So when we invoke the keyword this, when we use the keyword this, we are referring to the object where this is being written at write time. So this, in this case, refers to Grace Hopper, the object literal. Any, yeah, question?
Now I actually have a question. So you had, I don't know if you call them nested objects. You had, say, an outer object that had a property inner object. And in the inner object, you had some value this dot outer key that isn't in the inner object, but in the outer object. Will it point to that?
Something might have gotten lost in the word picture you painted, but if you're wondering whether if you have a nested object, which is what we call them, so we have an object. I'm going to actually live code this. There's no sense in not taking advantage of the tools that we've been given.
Are you recording?
Yes. Why?
Oh, I would have forgotten.
Okay. Yeah.
Try it out.
Let's see all the code that I'm working on. Okay. So your question is like, is that how you spell outer? It's not. Outer. Yes. Sorry. That is something I always forget. Okay. Better? Good? Yeah. Got it. So we have a property like hello kitty, and then we have like inner, and then this is an object, and you're wondering.
Say, okay, so it's a couple different instances. For the first one, say you had something that pointed to this dot hello.
This dot hello.
Like any instance where you would use this, like for calling a method.
Oh, okay.
You made a method in the inner.
Oh, you want it to be a method. Okay.
I don't know. I don't know if you would be able to call this for anything. We're all, like so far I've only used this for the keyword this for this lecture, so I only know it in the scope of
Yeah.
methods. I don't know if you can use this keyword just in objects in general.
REPL can be kind of weird, and this keyword is like infinitely weird. It has something, it can be affected by whether or not the file you're executing has the string use strict on the top. If it does, then the global object is undefined. If it doesn't, then it's window. But in this case, what my guess is, and I'm not 100% certain, my guess is that if we do console log outer obj inner, and then test and invoke it, I think that I think that this is going to be undefined, because as I understand it, or as I read it, this is scoped to this anonymous function, and this anonymous function doesn't have, or it's scoped to the inner function, neither of which has something called kitty. So yeah, we get an error. But out of curiosity, did someone say something?
Yeah, so what was that error?
Same thing. Huh. Oh, is it a syntax error? Thank you. Let's make sure that was the behavior. Yeah, it's undefined. But if we do this, I think it might say other kitty. God, commas, bane of my existence. Yeah, in this case, it's other kitty. Now, I don't want to like overload you guys with information. Heaven knows it's like drinking from a fire hose, regardless. But in your future JavaScript career, you might, in fact, you will encounter this thing called arrow functions. And a lot of people think arrow functions are just like a clever way to write functions or what have you. But arrow functions actually have this really interesting behavior within the context of the keyword this. And what it means is that, so the same way we made a function, an anonymous function, and the logic we have is it looks for a property called hello on the object, or in the current scope, I should say, not on the object, in the current scope, which is what this really looks for. And there's no property called hello, so it returns undefined. Arrow functions, or the fat arrow, which is the real term for it, do not create their own this context. They take the this of wherever they're declared. They have a lexical this. They have a this that is related to how they are written. Ah, I thought this was gonna. Oh well. Anyway, now I'm curious. Hold on. Oh, yeah. REPL can be funny. It's a great. REPL will function for all things that you need, but it also has certain behaviors to make sure that no one hacks it and crashes the system. And one of it is accessing the window object, and that's what we just tried to do here. So there's an error. Yes.
If you did that in the Chrome console, would it work?
I don't know. I'm assuming if Google is pretty persnickety about their security, so I'm assuming that it wouldn't work.
I just know that there's been a couple instances where I've done something in the Chrome console and I've gotten the expected values where in REPL I haven't.
Yeah, let's see. Hang on a sec. It's the window object, and there's no, yeah.
That's what you expected?
Is that what I expected? Yes, that is what I expected. Is that what I expected? Not quite. I don't want to get too bogged down in this because this is an instance of like going down this rabbit hole that we don't need to worry about. Although it was a great question, and if we had infinite time, I would it's fun to explore. And just as a general note, as you're learning JavaScript, the best way you familiarize yourself, it's like learning any other language, right? Has anyone gone through the horrible, painful process of learning a foreign language as an adult? And it's like a nightmare. But the only way you get better at it is by doing it over and over again and failing a lot. The nice thing about transferring that foreign language learning process from human languages to computer languages, the computer's not there to see your shame, unlike people. What?
You don't have to talk to anyone.
You don't have to talk to anyone. You talk to the computer. You fail as many times as you want. Computer doesn't know. It has no memory. All right, let's get back to the thing. We're almost done. So yeah, I encourage you guys, as you use the keyword this in the workshop that we're going to go on to right after this lecture, to think of this as a reference to the object where the method is defined. That should do for the workshop. And then on your own time, I encourage you to read the MDN documentation on this. It's interesting. So yeah. Ignore the bad title, but we have something here. We've created a method called getThis that just returns this, right? Everyone can see what's happening here? So this one's a little trickier than the other console logs that we've had to do before. Who wants to read this code, interpret it, and tell me what's going to be console logged on line 13 and on line 14? For which line? Yeah, it's going to return the whole object because this just refers to the object where it's declared. Yes, in the back, Kirsten.
So the return object is this, so that would mean Grace Hopper got first, so it's going to return Grace, and then Grace Hopper object equals Grace Hopper, so it's going to return.
Yes. Very nice. We're declaring a variable on line 12, And then we're using the equal sign, which to us looks like an equal sign, but at the computer is the assignment operator, to assign the variable the value returned by our getThis method. And as Kirsten pointed out, or no, as Nick pointed out, sorry, Nick. As Nick pointed out, the value of the method getThis is the keyword this, but in our context, that keyword this refers to the object in which the method that is returning it was declared, which is GraceHopper. So now we have access to all the properties on GraceHopper. And returned object is GraceHopper. That's what that is. Any questions about this? Any questions about the slide we're on? Cool. Let's do one more example. Take a moment. Read the code. We've got two objects now. But it's the same functionality that we've been exploring for the rest of the lecture, or all the lecture previously up to this. Who wants to take a guess what's going to be logged on line 12 and on line 14? Nick? You're right. -10? You're wrong. And the reason you're wrong.
Oh, you reassigned that.
Yes. Yeah. We reassigned. Right. This is a blast from the past. The past being yesterday. We use dot notation to reassign the value of num2. Does that make sense? Okay.
So you can redefine it on the global scope and it will redefine it.
Yeah. Because the method, so our difference, wait, hang on a second. This dot num1 is 20. This dot, yeah. Thought I was going crazy for a second. Yeah. This calc object is exactly the same. And this method, its execution isn't chronological, right? It's created at the time that we're creating the rest of calc, but the fact that we're using this in its interior logic, the fact that we're using this in the logic inside both of our methods, means that any changes to the values of the object are going to be written through to the methods of that object. It is always current to the object, because it is part of the object. Any questions about the slide we're on now? Question? What is the scope for? Is there anything about Yeah, you know, if we the rules that govern scope in this object are the same rules that govern scope everywhere else, which means that inner functions, inner objects have access to anything outside of them, but not the other way. You know, like if you're in your apartment, you know what's on TV and you know what street you live on, but if someone is on the street and they're looking at the sign, they don't know what's on your apartment TV. Question?
I know you said this has a lot of depth to it in terms of complexity, but in terms of what we've covered thus far, does it serve any other functionality than from us just rewriting the object name?
Does it serve any other functionality from us rewriting the object name? What it can do is if you have, hang on a second. Back to the live code. Oh, comma, yeah. The comma only.
No, I mean, you had a comma in the first object.
Oh, yeah. The linter that I use for work makes you do trailing commas, so it's reflex now. Anyway, let's say we have this. This is going to get hoisted, but I'll put it up here anyway. All right, let's run this real quick. Oh no, because I didn't do the commas. I already made this mistake. I made it twice. Oh my god, I'm sorry. Okay, this is the problem with live coding, but it's also important to demonstrate that software engineers make mistakes with the spelling. So, outer object. It has a property called toInvoke. That property is a function and it's test. So if we invoke it correctly, we get kitty. If we do this, we get world. You see the power of this? Do you remember how earlier, what's your name? Sorry.
That's JJ.
I know your name's JJ. What's your name? Christine? Remember when Christine was like, oh, so, is the goal that, I forget exactly, I don't want to misquote you, but I remember when answering that question, I talked about the power of having it be gracehopper.rank instead of, the actual string definition of gracehopper's rank. Means that when gracehopper's rank suddenly becomes super admiral, we don't need to replace two strings, we only need to replace one. Look what's happening here. We have two totally separate objects. But they have the same method. And that method makes use of the keyword this. Which means that when we invoke that method via just to go through what's happening here, because I don't think we saw this on the slides, I have a function called test. Test does a thing, it console logs this.hello. So test is going to be looking for this value of wherever it's being used. And specifically, it's going to try to find a property called hello on whatever the value of the keyword this is. What we're doing here is we're declaring a property called toInvoke, and we're assigning it the value test. The value test is just a function that we assign somewhere else. But depending on where we invoke that function, we're going to get a different result. And that, I think, should be an example of the power, one of the other features of this, the power of this.
Yeah, definitely helps. Thanks.
Cool. You want me to Slack this out to you guys?
Sure.
Okay, cool. And then you can play around with it, mix and match, do all the code stuff. So yeah, I'll Slack it out before the workshop. Yes, there's so much more to this. JavaScript is an object-oriented language, kind of. JavaScript is a weird language. It's both object-oriented and it has some functional properties. That's why everyone hates it, but they hate it because they don't understand it, and they're scared of its power. JavaScript is awesome. Anyway, yeah, so we're only skimming the surface of this. It has various object methods. This is just a slide that tells you what I've already told you, which is that don't worry about knowing every single little thing of this. When you interview for jobs as a software engineer, one of the questions they ask you is what is this? What is the keyword this? So and that question can be, my response to that question was always well, how much detail do you want me to go into? Because saying, this is the context in which a function is called is technically correct, but it's not merely the size of it. So, yeah. thus concludes the lecture portion of Bootcamp Prep today. We talked about what a method is. We talked about creating, accessing, and running methods. And then we did a very brief introduction to this. Before I open up the workshop and Slack out the pairs, does anyone have any other questions about any of the slides or any general concepts that we covered in the lecture today? Question?
Just we're talking about basic concept, declaring defining variable. Define, do you mean the same thing for assign? Because I know declaring variable.
Oh, yeah. I define, assign,
Okay.
just associating a value, a string, a boolean, an object, or whatever, with the space in memory that gets allocated, the space in computer memory that gets allocated when you say let var. No, Jesus. Never say let var. When you say let variable, whatever. Any other questions? Cool. All right. Thus concludes the lecture. Stand up, stretch your legs, go to the bathroom, get some coffee, get some water, and yeah. Also, someone please turn on the light as you're passing. That would be awesome. Thank you. We'll find out. Yes. What's the date today? The 20th?